Do you know what a crushed career sounds like? It is not a scream. It is chillingly quiet. It is the rejection beep of a keycard, the frantic scuff of designer shoes, and the sharp turn of a page inside a boardroom on the 50th floor. The most perfect revenge is served inside a cold financial dossier. Listen closely, because I am about to tell you how I took everything from an arrogant man without raising my voice once. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us now. Let's begin the story. My name is Kylie Johnson. I am 32 years old, a self-made venture capitalist, and I know exactly how to watch a disaster unfold without blinking. I sat in the sprawling, glass-walled lobby of a monolithic skyscraper in downtown Chicago. The morning light filtered through the tinted windows, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished Italian marble floor. I held a cup of dark espresso, feeling the heat seep into my palms, completely still, observing the spectacle unfolding near the reception desk. There she was, Sarah Miller, a woman who possessed the kind of brilliant, intuitive mind that could coax life out of concrete and steel, an exceptional landscape architect, and above all, my closest friend. Right now, she was not the confident creator I knew. She was a target. Her shoulders were hunched, her face drained of color, as she stood trapped in the center of an unwanted stage. The executioner was Marcus Thorne, the newly appointed Vice President of Operations for Verdant Horizon Properties. Marcus was a textbook example of corporate insecurity masquerading as authority. He wore a navy blue suit that was tailored at least 2 sizes too tight, a sartorial choice that only highlighted his tense, aggressive posture. He paced around Sarah like a predator, his voice booming over the gentle hum of the morning commuters. "You think your little trees and green spaces are going to save the bottom line?" Marcus sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are delusional, Sarah. Your entire department is a financial sinkhole. We are here to make money, not to plant gardens. You are done. Pack up your desk and get out of my building before I have security drag you out." The cruelty was not in the firing itself. Terminations happened every day in this city. The cruelty was the audience. Marcus had chosen the busiest hour, in the most public space of the building, specifically to break her spirit. Sarah's hands trembled so violently that she lost her grip on her portfolio. Her heavy, detailed ecological blueprints spilled across the marble floor, scattering like fallen leaves. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A young, fiercely nervous man darted forward. It was Diego, a skinny administrative assistant who always looked as though he had not slept in 3 days. Ignoring the heavy tension in the air, Diego dropped to his knees and began frantically gathering Sarah's scattered drawings. Marcus stopped pacing and snapped his head toward the assistant, his face contorted in disgust. "What do you think you are doing?" he barked, his voice echoing sharply against the glass walls. "Did I tell you to help her drop those papers right now? Or you can follow her out the door. You are nothing but an overpaid secretary. Diego, do not test me." Diego froze, his fingers clutching a schematic of a rooftop garden. He looked up at Marcus, terror swimming in his eyes, completely paralyzed by the public humiliation. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to stand up. I wanted to walk across that marble floor, look Marcus dead in the eye, and verbally eviscerate him. I wanted to defend my friend. But anger is a poor investment. Emotion is a liability. Instead of intervening, I sank deeper into the plush leather of my armchair. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso. I let the bitter taste ground me. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket. My thumbs moved with practiced speed, bypassing the public web and diving directly into my private financial terminals. I pulled up the internal portals and livestock data for Verdant Horizon Properties. I needed to see what Marcus was standing on. The numbers painted a very clear, very damning picture. My eyes scanned the spreadsheets. Revenue was down 17% in the last quarter alone. Operating costs had spiked by almost 30% in a mere 6 months since Marcus took over the operations division. Short-term debts were piling up. The liquidity ratio was plummeting. The company was bleeding cash at an unsustainable rate. Marcus was not acting out of strength. He was acting out of sheer, unadulterated panic. He was a man desperately trying to look powerful on a sinking ship. I looked back up from my screen. Sarah was rushing toward the revolving doors, her face buried in her hands, while Diego slowly stood up, head bowed under Marcus's triumphant, arrogant gaze. Marcus adjusted his tight jacket, looking thoroughly satisfied with the destruction he had just caused. He thought he had won. He thought he was the smartest, most ruthless man in the room. He had no idea that a predator was sitting less than 40 feet away, watching his every move. I locked my phone screen. I did not just want to get Marcus fired. That would be too easy. I decided right then and there, in the cold light of that Chicago morning, that Verdant Horizon Properties was going to become my personal chessboard, and Marcus Thorne was going to be the first pawn I sacrificed. I waited until 7 o'clock that evening. The sky above Chicago had bruised into a deep, stormy purple, and a relentless drizzle was slicking the pavements. I knew Diego's routine. I had spent the afternoon pulling his employee profile and tracking his digital footprint. He always took the Red Line train home, but on Tuesdays, he stopped at a faded, neon-lit diner 2 blocks from the station to avoid the rush hour crush. I was already sitting in a dimly lit corner booth when he walked in. His shoulders slumped, shaking the cold rain from his cheap nylon windbreaker. He ordered a black coffee, sat down, and stared blankly at the chipped formica table. I slid out of my booth, walked over, and sat directly across from him. He jumped, his eyes wide, recognizing me instantly from the lobby incident earlier that morning. "Do not panic, Diego," I said, keeping my voice low and perfectly even. "I am not here to cause trouble. I am here to offer you a way out." He looked around nervously, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the table. "Who are you?" "If Mr. Thorne finds out I am talking to a stranger about company business." "Marcus Thorne does not own you," I interrupted smoothly, cutting through his panic. "My name is Kylie. I am an independent investor. I saw exactly what happened this morning. I know how much you are paid. Diego, it is a miserable, insulting sum for the psychological abuse you endure daily. I am prepared to offer you exactly 3 times your current annual salary. The first year will be deposited directly into an offshore account of your choosing, starting tonight, as a retainer. Furthermore, when my business with Verdant Horizon is concluded, you will have a permanent senior executive track position that actually commands respect." Diego swallowed hard, his hands trembling around his steaming coffee mug. The sheer scale of the offer was short-circuiting his brain. "What do you want from me in return?" "I want you to be my proxy," I replied, leaning in slightly. "I need unrestricted, invisible access. I want his daily schedules. I want the hidden email threads he routinely deletes. I want every internal financial report, every draft of the balance sheet, and every vendor invoice that crosses his desk before he redacts the numbers for the board of directors. You are his assistant. You hold the keys to his entire kingdom. I just need you to leave the door unlocked." He stared at me for a long time. The fear in his dark eyes was slowly being consumed by a quiet, burning resentment. The memory of the morning's public humiliation was still a raw wound. He gave a single, definitive nod. "Tell me exactly what to do." The espionage operation began the very next morning. Diego proved to be exceptionally brilliant at corporate subterfuge. For a man who had been treated like a disposable piece of furniture by upper management, he knew exactly how to blend into the background. Over the next 2 weeks, my encrypted private servers began to fill with a steady, damning stream of data. While Marcus was out having 3-hour martini lunches with prospective clients, Diego was using a micro camera to photograph private ledgers kept in a locked bottom drawer. When Marcus demanded Diego stay late to organize his files, Diego was copying entire hard drives onto thumb drives and dropping them into secure postal boxes across the city. My penthouse office transformed into a tactical war room. The walls were covered in projected spreadsheets, bank statements, and printed emails connected by red digital lines. The financial bleeding I had originally suspected was just the surface. Marcus was running Verdant Horizon into the ground with catastrophic mismanagement, but gross incompetence did not explain the aggressive, almost frantic rate at which he was hemorrhaging capital. There had to be a catalyst, a black hole sucking the money out of the company. I found the fatal anomaly late on a Thursday night. I was combing through a buried asset ledger Diego had managed to pull from a secondary accounting server. It was a preliminary contract for the sale of a massive plot of undeveloped land on the city outskirts. This was not just any piece of land. It was the exact site designated for Sarah's flagship ecological project, the one she had poured 2 years of her life into designing. Marcus was quietly offloading it behind the board's back. The buyer was listed as Desert Mirage Holdings. I ran the name through my proprietary investigative databases. The purchase price listed on the contract was absolutely absurd. Marcus was selling prime, highly sought-after real estate for roughly 20 cents on the dollar. It was financial suicide for Verdant Horizon, but a monumental, lottery-winning steal for the buyer. I dug deeper into Desert Mirage Holdings. It took me 6 uninterrupted hours of slicing through thick corporate veils, dummy directors, and fake registered addresses. The paper trail left Illinois, bounced through a complex web of shell companies in Delaware, and finally landed in Nevada, specifically Las Vegas. The ultimate parent organization of Desert Mirage was not a real estate firm. It was a massive, aggressive syndicate known for operating high-stakes, off-strip casinos. I leaned back in my leather chair, the pieces of the puzzle snapping together with terrifying clarity. Marcus was not just a bad executive making poor investments. He was a degenerate gambler. He had racked up personal debt so massive that the syndicate was clearly coming to collect, to save his own skin. He was carving up Verdant Horizon's most valuable physical assets and handing them over to his creditors under the guise of legitimate corporate restructuring. He was using the company as his personal piggy bank to pay off the mob. The standard protocol for a discovery of this magnitude was obvious. I had enough hard, documented evidence to walk into a federal bureau, hand over the files, and watch Marcus Thorne get hauled away in handcuffs for severe corporate fraud and embezzlement. But putting Marcus in a federal penitentiary felt entirely too sterile. It was a bureaucratic punishment. It lacked the poetry of a true reckoning. I did not just want to see him arrested. I wanted to systematically dismantle his power, strip him of his unearned arrogance, and take his empire out from under his feet while he watched helplessly. I immediately initiated a shadow acquisition campaign. Instead of using my primary investment firm, I utilized my own network of 7 different shell companies, scattered across various obscure tax havens. I began sweeping up every floating share of Verdant Horizon stock available on the open market. I had to move with agonizing, surgical precision. If I bought too much too fast, the stock price would artificially inflate, alerting the board of directors and triggering automatic defensive poison pill measures. I bought shares in increments of 100, then 500, then 2,000. I bought during temporary market dips. I bought when the daily trading volume was noisy enough to completely mask my movements. My automated algorithms worked tirelessly, buying through multiple brokerage accounts to hide the origin of the capital. To the outside world, the stock of Verdant Horizon looked stagnant, perhaps even a little depressed under Marcus's poor leadership. Inside my war room, the numbers were steadily climbing, 10%, 22%, 35%. By the end of the 3rd week, my network of phantom corporations had quietly swallowed up exactly 39% of the entire company. I was now the single largest shareholder, entirely invisible, pulling the strings from the dark. The trap was perfectly set. Marcus was walking blindly toward the edge of a cliff, and I was the one actively paving the road beneath his feet. The encrypted phone in my coat pocket vibrated violently at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was standing in my dimly lit penthouse, staring at the glowing financial projections projected across my war room wall, when Diego's secure caller identification flashed on the screen. He was whispering rapidly, his breath hitching with raw panic. Marcus had just received a terrifying phone call from a Nevada area code. The Vegas syndicate creditors were no longer willing to wait for the standard end of month closing cycle. They wanted their money immediately. Marcus, sweating and frantic, had just ordered Diego to completely rewrite the master executive schedule. The signing ceremony for the land transfer was being aggressively moved up by an entire week. It was now locked in for Friday afternoon. I checked the heavy silver clock on my desk. That gave me less than 48 hours to execute a complete corporate coup. I currently held exactly 39% of the company. It was a massive chunk of equity, enough to cause chaos at a standard board meeting. But it was absolutely useless for what I needed to accomplish. I needed absolute, undeniable veto power. I needed 51%. I needed exactly 12% more to freeze the sale, fire Marcus on the spot, and save Verdant Horizon. The problem was the open market. My aggressive, silent buying over the past 3 weeks had severely dried up the liquidity pool. There simply were not enough loose shares left floating around on the public exchange to buy in less than 2 days. No matter how much capital I threw at the brokers, I tore through the historical shareholder registry, my eyes scanning lines of data until they burned. There was only one unbroken, dormant block of shares large enough to bridge my gap. Exactly 12.5% of the company belonged to a man named Elias Vance. Elias was a brilliant, highly eccentric pioneer of early green technology who had retired a decade ago. He hated corporate culture. He utterly despised Wall Street. After selling his tech conglomerate, he had parked a portion of his wealth in Verdant Horizon, back when they actually cared about sustainable development, and then he completely vanished from the public eye. He lived on an isolated cattle ranch deep in the rugged, unforgiving mountains of Montana. He lived totally off the grid, refusing to use modern smartphones, email, or any form of digital communication. He was a ghost holding the absolute key to my entire strategy. By 4 o'clock in the morning, I was strapping myself into the cold leather seat of a chartered private jet at Midway Airport. The pilot stood in the cabin door, grimly warning me about a massive, unseasonal storm front moving aggressively across the northern Rockies. I looked him dead in the eye and told him I would double his exorbitant fee if he got me to the closest functional airstrip in Montana. The flight was an absolute nightmare of aviation. For 3 agonizing hours, the small jet was violently tossed through heavy atmospheric turbulence. The metal hull groaned and shuddered under the immense strain of freezing crosswinds. I gripped the leather armrests until my hands cramped and ached, my mind racing through complex negotiation tactics, absolutely refusing to let an act of atmospheric nature destroy my carefully arranged chessboard. We finally touched down on a completely snow-covered runway in a remote Montana valley. The landing gear skidded terrifyingly on the ice before the thrust reversers violently jerked us to a halt. From the airfield, I rented a heavy-duty 4-wheel drive truck. I drove for 2 exhausting hours up winding, treacherous mountain dirt roads, completely blinded by a ferocious whiteout blizzard. The vehicle's heater barely fought off the biting cold creeping through the drafty windows. My thick tires spun and slipped on black ice, sliding inches away from sheer drops into the dark canyons below. Finally, the high beams cut through the swirling, violent snow to reveal a heavy wooden gate and a sprawling, snow-dusted log cabin set against the tree line. I abandoned the truck near the front porch, pulling my heavy wool coat tight against the freezing, howling wind. I marched up the wooden steps and hammered my fist against the heavy oak door. It swung open to reveal Elias Vance. He was a tall, imposing man with a thick gray beard and sharp, deeply cynical eyes. He was holding a heavy iron fire poker in his right hand. He looked at my designer coat, my expensive leather boots, and my frozen, determined face. His expression instantly hardened into pure, unfiltered disdain. "I do not take visitors," Elias growled, his voice sounding like grinding gravel. "And I certainly do not entertain desperate finance vultures who fly through dangerous blizzards. I know exactly who you are. I read the financial journals when the Postal Service actually manages to get through. You buy companies, you strip them down to the studs, and you sell the bones for a profit. Turn around and get back in your truck before you freeze to death. He started to close the heavy door. I slammed my leather boot against the doorframe, completely ignoring the sharp bolt of pain shooting up my leg. I need your 12.5% of verdant horizon. Elias, I said, my voice steady and commanding despite the freezing wind tearing at my face. I will pay you a premium of 40% above the current market valuation. Right here, right now. I have the digital transfer documents ready in my briefcase. Elias let out a harsh, incredibly bitter laugh. Money. That is all you people understand. You think throwing premium percentages at me matters in the slightest? I have more money than I could possibly spend in 10 lifetimes out here. I hold those shares strictly because I believed in the ecological mandate of the original founders. I will not hand them over to a corporate raider just so you can artificially inflate your quarterly portfolio. Now get your boot out of my door before I break your ankle. The purely financial approach was dead on arrival. Pure logic was entirely useless here. The blizzard roared violently around us, threatening to freeze me exactly where I stood on his porch. I was actively losing. Marcus was going to win. The Vegas syndicate was going to swallow the pristine land. In a moment of pure, calculated desperation, I abandoned my aggressive posture. I reached into the heavy leather satchel slung across my shoulder. I did not pull out a legal contract, a bank statement, or a chart of stock projections. I pulled out a thick, beautifully bound architectural portfolio. It was Sarah's master blueprint for the massive ecological sanctuary. You are absolutely right, I yelled over the screaming wind, shoving the heavy portfolio directly toward his chest. I do not care about the trees, but the brilliant woman who painstakingly drew these designs does, and the incompetent man currently running Verdant Horizon is rapidly selling the very soil these blueprints are meant for to a Las Vegas gambling syndicate to pay off his illicit casino debts. Elias froze. The heavy iron fire poker lowered slightly toward the wooden floorboards. He looked down at the embossed cover of the portfolio, then slowly back up at my eyes, searching for deception. Look at them, I demanded, my voice cutting sharply through the roar of the storm. Marcus Thorne is signing the irrevocable transfer papers on Friday afternoon. He is going to pave over a vital wetland to build a massive concrete casino parking lot. If you keep your shares dormant out of some misplaced sense of moral superiority, you are personally handing him the keys to the bulldozer. I do not want to strip the company. Elias, I want to completely destroy Marcus Thorne, and I want to put the visionary architect who designed those blueprints in charge of the entire development project, but I simply cannot do it without your proxy. Elias stood completely still in the doorway for what felt like an eternity, the snow rapidly gathering on his broad shoulders. He slowly opened the leather portfolio. Even in the dim, flickering amber light of the porch lamp, the intricate, brilliant designs of Sarah's sustainable ecosystem jumped off the pages. I watched the deep cynicism in his eyes slowly give way to a profound, quiet understanding. We were entirely different species of predators, existing in completely different worlds, but in that fleeting, freezing moment, we recognized the exact same enemy. He stepped back and silently motioned with his head for me to enter the warmth of the cabin. We did not speak another word. He walked heavily over to a massive oak desk, pulled a silver fountain pen from a top drawer, and took the legal proxy transfer documents from my freezing, trembling hands. He signed his name with sharp, aggressive strokes, legally transferring total voting authority of his 12.5% directly to me. He handed the heavy stack of papers back, his sharp eyes locking onto mine with terrifying intensity. "Do not miss," he said quietly. "I never miss," I replied. I tucked the most powerful financial weapon in my entire arsenal deep into my coat, turned around, and walked straight back into the roaring, blinding blizzard. I now controlled 51%. The chessboard was finally mine. Back in Chicago, the atmosphere on the top floor of Verdant Horizon was suffocatingly tense. It was Friday afternoon. Exactly 1 hour before the execution of Marcus Thorne's desperate survival plan, the VIP boardroom, a sprawling expanse of mahogany and floor-to-ceiling glass, had been prepped for the arrival of the Desert Mirage Holdings representatives. Diego stood near the extravagant catering cart, meticulously arranging crystal water glasses. His burner phone vibrated discreetly in his pocket. He pulled it out, shielding the screen with his hand. The message from my encrypted number contained exactly 2 sentences. Delay him at all costs. I am on my way from the airport. Diego slid the phone back into his pocket. A microscopic, icy smile touched the corners of his mouth. For years, he had been the invisible punching bag. Today, he was the executioner's assistant. The heavy oak doors swung open, and Marcus marched in, flanked by 3 men who looked less like real estate developers and more like high-end enforcers. They wore expensive, aggressively styled suits and possessed the cold, dead eyes of apex predators. These were the Vegas syndicate men. Marcus was sweating profusely despite his tailored jacket, rubbing his hands together with a manic, ingratiating energy that practically reeked of desperation. "Gentlemen, please, take a seat." Marcus gestured grandly to the Italian leather chairs. "We have the digital presentation ready to go. I will walk you through the final asset transfer protocols right now." Marcus snapped his fingers at Diego, treating him like a disobedient dog. "Get the projector on. Diego, now. Do not make us wait." Diego nodded meekly. He picked up a freshly poured, steaming cup of dark roast coffee and walked toward the state-of-the-art projection console. He tripped. It was a masterpiece of physical comedy, a flawlessly executed stumble that sent the entire cup of boiling hot coffee flying directly into the exposed ventilation grate of the main projector server. A sharp hiss echoed through the room, followed immediately by the harsh crackle of frying motherboards. A thick plume of acrid black smoke billowed out from the machine, completely blanking the massive display screen. Marcus leaped out of his chair, his face instantly turning a violent shade of crimson. "You absolute idiot!" he roared, slamming his fist down on the mahogany table. "Are you blind? You just destroyed a $10,000 piece of equipment." "I am so incredibly sorry, Mr. Thorne," Diego stammered, bowing his head and projecting a masterclass in pathetic subservience. "My shoe caught on the carpet. I will call the tech department immediately." "Get out of my sight and get a backup screen in here," Marcus screamed, completely losing his composure. The Vegas representatives exchanged a long, meaningful look. Their lead negotiator, a man with a thick neck and a platinum watch, raised a single eyebrow. Men of real power did not shriek at the help. Marcus was breaking, revealing the pathetic cornered animal hiding beneath his expensive suit. They were beginning to severely doubt the competence of a man who could not even manage a simple meeting without an embarrassing meltdown. While pretending to frantically wipe up the spilled coffee with linen napkins, Diego covertly slipped his hand under the main console desk. He found the master climate control override panel. With a quick, practiced flick of his wrist, he bypassed the standard thermostat and cranked the industrial air conditioning units to their absolute maximum freezing capacity. Within 5 minutes, the ambient temperature in the VIP boardroom plummeted drastically. The vents blasted freezing air directly down onto the syndicate men. The lead negotiator shivered, pulling his jacket tighter across his chest. "Is there a reason we are conducting business in a meat locker?" Marcus, the Vegas man asked, his voice dripping with dangerous irritation. "We came here to finalize a land deal, not to freeze to death while your incompetent staff destroys the electronics." Marcus looked like he was about to have a severe cardiac event. He rushed to the wall thermostat, furiously punching the digital screen, completely unaware that Diego had already physically severed the connection under the desk. "Diego!" Marcus shrieked, his voice cracking hysterically. "Fix the temperature right now. You are utterly useless. I will ensure you never work in this city again." "The system must be short-circuiting from the smoke, sir," Diego replied calmly, his face a perfect mask of innocent panic, though his eyes gleamed with quiet, predatory delight. We have to evacuate this room. It is a severe safety hazard. I suggest we move down to the temporary conference room on the 40th floor. Marcus, trembling with rage and humiliation, turned to his increasingly hostile guests and offered a sickeningly sweet apology. He ushered the freezing, irritated mobsters out into the marble hallway toward the private executive elevators. He aggressively pushed the call button. Nothing happened. He pushed it again, slamming his palm against the metal panel. Standing near the boardroom door, holding a damp coffee rag, Diego watched the chaotic scene unfold. Just seconds prior, he had accessed the building's maintenance application on his phone and securely locked down the entire VIP elevator bank. It seems the power surge has trapped the cars. Mr. Thorne, Diego offered helpfully, you will have to use the emergency stairwell. Marcus let out a strangled cry of pure frustration. The Vegas syndicate men, entirely fed up with the pathetic display of mismanagement, pushed past him without a word and shoved open the heavy metal door to the stairs. Marcus scrambled after them, forced to endure a humiliating, exhausting 10-flight walk of shame down a concrete stairwell. Diego stood alone in the hallway, tossing the dirty rag into a trash can. The pawn had successfully paralyzed the king. Now, he just had to wait for the queen to arrive. 10 agonizing flights of stairs later, Marcus Thorne pushed open the heavy fire door to the 40th floor. He was gasping for air, his custom-tailored suit plastered to his back with sweat. The Vegas syndicate representatives followed closely behind, their previous irritation now hardening into a cold, lethal silence. The temporary conference room they commandeered was stark and lifeless, a far cry from the mahogany luxury of the penthouse. It smelled faintly of floor wax and stale air. Marcus frantically arranged the final transfer documents on the cheap laminate table. His hands shook violently. He knew the syndicate was entirely out of patience. He just needed 5 minutes to legalize the theft. 60 floors below, the revolving glass doors of the verdant horizon lobby spun with a heavy, purposeful momentum. I stepped onto the polished marble floor. I was no longer the silent observer hiding in the corner with a cup of espresso. The blizzard of Montana had left a razor-sharp edge on my posture. My dark wool coat swept behind me like a mantle. Every step I took echoed through the cavernous space, a steady, rhythmic countdown to an execution. I walked directly toward the restricted executive security gates, with the absolute certainty of a queen walking into her own throne room. A burly security guard noticed my trajectory. He stepped out from behind the front desk, his hand raising to intercept me. "Excuse me, ma'am. This area is strictly for authorized personnel only. I need to see a badge." I did not slow my pace. I did not even look at him, because standing right beside the electronic turnstiles was Diego. He looked completely different from the terrified assistant cowering in this very lobby weeks ago. His spine was straight. He pulled a solid black, highest-level access card from his pocket, a card I had personally coded and authorized from the runway in Montana just 2 hours prior. He swiped it against the reader. The heavy glass gates chimed and slid open instantly. The guard stopped dead in his tracks, utterly confused. Diego gave me a singular, deeply respectful nod as I glided through the barrier. We stepped into the express elevator together, the doors sealed shut, cutting off the ambient noise of the lobby. The ascent was terrifyingly quiet. The digital display above the door blinked rapidly, counting the floors. 10, 20, 30. There was no need for conversation. We both knew exactly what was about to happen. The atmosphere inside that metal box was heavy, vibrating with the electric tension of a gathering storm. I adjusted the lapels of my coat. I felt the thick stack of Proxy transfer papers resting securely inside my inner pocket. Inside the stark room on the 40th floor, Marcus pulled a heavy gold-plated fountain pen from his breast pocket. He uncapped it with a trembling hand. He looked down at the final signature line on the irrevocable asset transfer contract. A slick, arrogant smile slowly crept across his flushed face. He had survived. He was about to wipe away a massive, lethal gambling debt. successfully sacrificing the entire future of Verdant Horizon to save his own miserable life. He looked up at the stone-faced Vegas negotiators and offered a triumphant, sickening grin. "Gentlemen, the land is yours," Marcus declared. He lowered his hand. The gold nib of the pen hovered exactly 1 millimeter above the crisp, white paper, right at that absolute, microscopic fraction of a second. The heavy wooden doors of the conference room were violently kicked wide open. The heavy wooden doors struck the drywall with a violent, thunderous crack that echoed through the sterile conference room. Every head snapped toward the entrance. I stepped over the threshold, my boots sharp against the laminate flooring, and walked straight to the center of the table. I did not break eye contact with Marcus. I reached into my coat, pulled out the thick, legally binding dossier from Montana, and slammed it down directly on top of his pristine transfer documents. The sound was like a gunshot. "Put the pen down," I commanded, my voice entirely devoid of warmth. "This negotiation is permanently and immediately canceled." Marcus practically leaped out of his chair, his face contorting from shock into absolute, unhinged fury. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Who the hell are you? How did you get up here? Diego, call building security right now and have this lunatic physically dragged out of my building." "He is not going to do that, Marcus," I interrupted, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And this is no longer your building. My name is Kylie Johnson, and as of 2 hours ago, I am the majority shareholder of Verdant Horizon Properties. I hold 51% of the total voting equity. I own the board. I own the assets. And I own you. You are completely finished." Marcus let out a scoff that sounded closer to a dry heave. "You are bluffing. That is mathematically impossible. The shares are not available." "Check the proxy signatures," I said, gesturing to the dossier. "Elias Vance gave me his entire block this morning. You played a very sloppy game, Marcus." Before he could fully process the catastrophic shift in reality, I turned my attention to the 3 Vegas syndicate representatives. They were staring at me, their cold eyes calculating the sudden chaos. "Gentlemen," I addressed them smoothly, "I am fully aware of who you represent. I am also aware that Marcus here owes your employers a staggering amount of money in illicit gambling debts. He brought you here under the guise of a legitimate corporate land acquisition. What he failed to mention is that he lacks the board approval to sell this asset at a 90% discount. If you sign that paper, you are not buying prime real estate. You are actively participating in federal corporate fraud, massive embezzlement, and a highly traceable money laundering scheme. My lawyers are already on standby to hand the entire paper trail over to the federal authorities. Do you really want to drag your syndicate into a massive federal indictment just to cover the pathetic debts of a middle manager?" The lead negotiator looked at the dossier, then looked at Marcus. The realization hit him instantly. Marcus had tried to use them as a shield. The negotiator stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He leaned over the table, his face inches from Marcus's sweating forehead. "You tried to make us your accomplices in a federal crime to save your own skin," the Vegas man whispered, his voice dripping with lethal intent. "We are done here, but your debt to us remains. Expect a visit." The 3 men turned and walked out of the room without another word, taking Marcus's only lifeline with them. Marcus collapsed back into his chair, the remaining color draining completely from his face. His empire had evaporated in less than 3 minutes. Desperate, he looked around wildly and locked eyes with Diego, who was standing quietly by the door. "It was you," Marcus hissed, his voice trembling with pathetic venom. "You leaked the schedules. You ruined the projector. I will kill you. I will make sure you are destroyed." "You will not speak a single word to my new executive," I snapped, cutting off his tirade. I walked over and stood next to the former administrative assistant. "Allow me to introduce the new Chief Operating Officer of Verdant Horizon. He knows more about the actual operations of this company than you ever did, and his first official duty in his new role is going to be exceptionally satisfying." Diego stepped forward, looking down at his former tormentor. The quiet, repressed fear was entirely gone, replaced by a profound, towering confidence. Security is already on the way up, Mr. Thorne, Diego said, his voice perfectly calm and professional. I suggest you gather your personal belongings, though, given the circumstances, you will not be allowed to take anything from the desk. Right on cue. The doors opened again. Two large, uniformed security guards stepped into the room, but they were not alone. Walking right behind them was Sarah Miller. She looked radiant, completely transformed from the shattered woman in the lobby weeks ago. She held her chin high. I picked up the master ecological blueprints from the table and handed them directly to her. Welcome back, Sarah. You are officially reinstated as the Senior Design Director. You have total creative and financial control over the Sanctuary project. Build it exactly the way you envisioned. Sarah took the blueprints, a brilliant, triumphant smile spreading across her face. She looked at Marcus, who was now being forcefully hauled to his feet by the security guards. Thank you, Kylie, Sarah said softly. Marcus thrashed weakly as the guards dragged him toward the door. His expensive, overly tight suit bunching up awkwardly around his shoulders. He was babbling incoherently, a broken man being physically removed from the very room where he had planned his greatest theft. I did not bother listening to his final words. I turned away, walking over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the sprawling Chicago skyline. Diego handed me a fresh, perfectly brewed cup of dark espresso. I took the cup, feeling the heat seep into my palms. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The bitter taste grounded me perfectly. I looked out over the city, a quiet, deadly smile touching my lips as the heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind the ruined man. The chessboard was clear. The silence was absolutely perfect. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it, as an ad-free channel. Your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Boss Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.